I am an intellectual, and like everybody, I believe that my interests and expertise is more important than anyone else's. So inevitably I'm sad if intellectuals are not taken seriously. On the other hand, observing the behaviour and opinions of my fellow intellectuals, I fully understand why. You know, they have been systematically troublemakers throughout the 20th century. The great disasters of the 20th century were initiated and accomplished by intellectuals. Lenin and his crew, Trotsky and Hitler and his crew, Mao Zedong and his crew, these were all self-identifying intellectuals. They weren't brilliant in the way that, say, Kant or Shakespeare was brilliant, but by the standards of their time and given the political circumstances, they did stand out as thinking people. And I think people lost trust in thinking people, as you know, ordinary people lost trust in the intellectual class as a result of their behaviour, and it has never really come back. Well, what we would need is a new generation of people who were both well educated and intellectually accomplished, and also serious public-spirited people. People like Winston Churchill, for instance, Charles de Gaulle. But they don't seem to be being produced. You know, I think we've lost the idea of the educated but humble good citizen. You know, and we don't choose our political leaders from that class anymore. Well, in a democracy, inevitably short-term appetites and short-term interests take precedence over long-term visions of what the community should be, and that's the more consumerist a society is, the more that is true. And of course, people have got used to an incredible level of consumption, and not just of ordinary things like food and travel and so on, but of real luxuries. And so politicians have got in the habit of offering them even more. And one of the things that doesn't seem to occur on their list of consumables is things like books and music and art and all the things that interest me. We live in a moment when reason is publicly despised, as somehow, you know, to reason about things is to exert some kind of spurious control over them, which you're not entitled to. And the whole movement of the post-truth society, you know, that truth isn't what matters is power. You know, anybody who tries to put forward his own opinions as true is for that very reason oppressing all those who disagree with him. Yeah. You know, so we're in a situation where the intellectual life, if you mean by that, pursuing the truth by rational argument, is regarded as a threat by many people. Culture obviously has never been a single thing. We've always, well, ever since the Enlightenment, distinguished the high culture of the educated classes from the popular culture, which appeals to everyone and perhaps is manufactured by everyone. And I think we've seen a decline in popular culture in its moral and spiritual content. You know, it's been reduced to something of the lowest and most degraded kind, whereas high culture has obviously stayed aloof from that. Not entirely. You know, there's been movements of desecration in the arts, but not sunk to the level of the, you know, of the internet today. In politics, conservatism is one thing. I think I still retain the belief that ordinary people are conservative about all the things they care about. You know, that means that they really want to keep what they value and not see it degraded. So I don't think, you know, I think conservatism is a perfectly coherent way of life, and it is the way of life of a normal social human being. But how to be a conservative in politics is another matter, because there you're competing with loudmouthed bores who have no understanding of what it's all about.
Yeah.
I've never been an optimist about anything really, but I agree that you shouldn't let pessimism prevail. You shouldn't let it interfere with your joy of life. But optimism, in my reading of historical events, has been the cause of far more tragedy than pessimism. A natural, normal, skeptical approach to things retains them in being more effectively than these enthusiastic movements for glorious change. Funnily enough, my son, who's 18, is now starting university. What I say to him is, please read a book every now and then, and that's about as far as I dare go. And
does that work?
It has worked, yes. Every now and then he will read a book. But of course his generation doesn't regard books in the way that we regarded them. These are important because there's knowledge stored in them, but there's all this competing, fleeting stuff that is there in the little device in their hands. And there's no way of getting them away from it, because that's the way they communicate with their generation. We're in this extraordinary situation where the only people who really read properly are the blind. I don't think that there is the same kind of longing for mass movements of a crowd-like character on the right now as there are on the left. And indeed, in the tradition of Anglophone conservatism, being against that kind of thing is what it's all about. In America, until very recently, it's been possible publicly to confess to being a conservative, even in a university. But it's not now so easy. I think there is a need on the left to have an enemy. And the essential attitude of the left is founded in the belief that everything is in the wrong hands, and that power is something that I ought to have, but somebody else has. So they look around for the things that have power. That's the old institutions, the things that have inherited wealth, influence, and all that, and the old worldview that goes with that. And all these are then demonized. They're not just a rival set of beliefs or lifestyles. They are the enemy. And I think that is something which has come very much to the fore in recent years. That people on the left believe that the other side, whatever it is not just wrong but evil, and we have the right to destroy them. Yes, about some things I think the left, well, the more reasonable left have been right. They're right about their sense that modern capitalism is not the friend of the people. They have perhaps the wrong reasons for thinking this sometimes, but there are elements of capitalism which are completely out of control, and in corporate governance and all that, and we've seen the effects of that. There are all sorts of things which would be naturally supported by the ordinary conservative American, which are not necessarily the right things to support. Trump is a very new kind of thing, as everybody knows, he doesn't really have thoughts that can't be comprehended in 140 characters. Whether that, I'm not saying that's essentially a bad thing. There can be circumstances, like in a military conflict, where that is exactly the right thing. Yeah. But of course it does mean that he could only govern with the help of people who do occasionally sit down and think things through. Yeah. And that's the question, whether he is doing that or not. I don't judge.